Welcome back, everybody, to the Ranger's Apprentice The Early Years series, Book 1, The Tournament at Gorlan. And today we're in Chapter 11, so let's go ahead and get into it. Leander shook hands with the two men and invited them into his cabin. They sat at the table, and Leander offered them ale. "Do you have any coffee?" Halt asked. Leander shook his head. "Coffee's hard to come by at the moment. The Baron is making sure I don't get any luxuries or supplies. The villagers are sneaking food to me, sparing me what they can. I'm not sure how much longer I can hold out here." "Ale is fine, then," Halt said, and the local ranger poured 3 small tankards full. They all sipped appreciatively, and Halt looked around the cabin, with its long room serving as a sitting room, and a small kitchen space off to one side. Doorways led to 2 other rooms, bedrooms, he assumed. "This is cozy," he said. The 2 rangers glanced at him, then at the interior of the cabin itself. They were both accustomed to rangers' cabins, and so didn't find them particularly noteworthy. "It's a standard ranger's cabin," Crowley told him. "We all have them, pretty much in the same layout. As I said, we prefer to live separately from the castle and the Baron in each fief. That way, we retain our independence." Leander nodded agreement. "Unlike my replacement," he said, sarcasm obvious in his voice. "He likes to live in the Baron's shadow. I've heard he has a luxurious suite of rooms at the castle." "Then why are they so keen to have you out of here?" Halt asked, indicating the cabin with a sweep of his arm. Leander curled his lips scornfully. "The new man wants it as a hunting lodge," he said. "Not that he'd know anything about hunting. I've stayed on because this way I can keep helping the villagers if they need it." "And by being here, you are a thorn under the Baron's saddle?" suggested Halt. For the first time since they'd met him, Leander allowed himself the barest of grins. "Yes, that too," he said. "Now what's all this about Morgarath?" Crowley quickly explained what they had learned about Morgarath's schemes and how they were determined to thwart them. Leander listened carefully, then switching his gaze between the 2 young men, he asked, "You're planning to do it yourselves? Just the 2 of you?" "We've got a list of names. Rangers who have been discredited by Morgarath. We want to recruit them and spoil Morgarath's party," Crowley said. "He's planning to make his move during the tournament at Gorlan," Halt put in, and Leander frowned thoughtfully, digesting this information. "That's about 7 weeks away. How many men do you think you'll need?" "We've got the names of 12, Crowley said, "but they're all rangers, so that should make a pretty potent group." Leander nodded slowly, considering. "Yes, I agree. 12 rangers would be a force worth reckoning with. But you'll need to get some of the other barons on your side as well. A lot of them will just go with the prevailing wind, and Morgarath is a well-respected figure. You need someone to counteract that." "We're planning to approach Errol of Redmont Fief," Crowley told him. "From what we've heard, there's little love lost between him and Morgarath." "Yes, I've heard much the same, and Redmont is one of the more powerful fiefs, maybe as powerful as Gorlan itself. Errol would be a handy ally. He has the prestige you'll need to sway a lot of the others to your side. This is going to be a matter of winning people over, as much as defeating Morgarath by sheer force of arms." They sat in silence for a minute or 2, while Leander pondered the situation. Halt fidgeted in his seat. He wanted to press Leander for a commitment right away, but Crowley caught his eye and shook his head. Better for the man to make up his mind without pressure. Finally, Leander looked up at them. "So, how many men do you have so far?" he asked, and the two men exchanged a glance. There was an awkward pause. "2 of us," Halt said, eventually. Leander looked at him and held up 3 fingers, a grim smile spreading over his face. "Make that 3, he said. It took Leander 10 minutes to pack the belongings he wanted to take with him. He strode out of the cabin door and turned to look back at the little building, a look of sadness on his face. "I've enjoyed life here," he said quietly to Crowley. Halt had volunteered to go to the stable and saddle his horse. "It sticks in my throat to leave it for that idiot in his satin green cloak. I'm tempted to put a torch to it and burn it to the ground." Crowley laid a hand on his arm. "Don't. You'll be coming back here before too long." Leander nodded slowly. "Let's hope so." Halt emerged from the rear of the cabin, leading a dun-colored horse. Leander took the reins from him. "Thanks," he said. "You didn't try to mount him, did you?" Halt frowned and shook his head. "Why would I do that?" Leander exchanged a grin with Crowley and dismissed the matter. "Never mind," he said. They mounted their horses and moved out at a slow walk. As they reached the first bend in the track, Leander stopped and turned back to look sadly at his neat little cabin. It seemed like a symbol of all that had been good and simple and straightforward in the world, all that Morgarath had been trying to drag down. Then, abruptly, he turned away and urged his horse to a canter, leaving the little cabin in the woods behind him. They had already decided who would be their next recruit. His name was Berrigan, the ranger in Westland fief. They had to traverse another fief to reach Westland, and as before, they elected to stay away from towns and villages and to camp out. It was strange to have a new member in their group. Halt and Crowley had grown used to each other's company over the preceding weeks, but it didn't take long for Leander to fit in. At least now, Halt thought, they'd get more sleep with another member to take his turn keeping watch at night. As they rode, Crowley filled Leander in on the meager details he knew of Halt's origins, how he had come from Hibernia after being instructed in ranger skills by Pritchard, and how he had helped Crowley when he had been attacked by a group of Morgarath soldiers. He had no idea of Halt's royal antecedents, of course, so he made no mention of that side of his history. When he heard how the soft-spoken Hibernian had rejected Morgarath's offer to join his forces, Leander nodded approvingly. His respect for Halt increased. He had already seen an example of his speed and accuracy with the longbow. He had no doubt that he would show the same skill with his sax and throwing knife, and he was impressed with Halt's woodcraft. The Hibernian had a natural ability to select a good campsite, one well screened from the trail through the woods, where they would have ample warning of someone approaching them. He also admired both the other men's skill and ability at camp cooking. Leander was an indifferent cook at best, although cooking was one of the skills an apprentice ranger was required to master. Leander had managed to pass his tests as an apprentice, but had then pretty well ignored the finer points. As a result, when he cooked game over a fire, he tended to scorch the outside and leave the interior virtually raw. He didn't have the patience that Halt and Crowley displayed, and quickly realized that he would eat a lot better if he left the food preparation to them. In return, he took on the menial chores around their nightly camp, preparing the fire, cutting firewood, and cleaning their utensils after they had eaten. On the 3rd day after they had left his cabin, they crossed the border into Westland fief. Crowley pointed to the small stone column that stood by the side of the track, marking their entry into the fief. "Another half-day, and we'll reach Castle Westland," he said. "Berrigan," Leander muttered, half to himself. "Think I remember him. He was the singer, wasn't he?" "That's right," Crowley agreed. "He played the guitarra and sang. He was the one who composed Cabin in the Trees." Halt looked up. "What's that?" "It's the Ranger song," Leander told him. "It's sung at all our gatherings." There was a slight pause. Then, without any discussion, both Leander and Crowley began to sing softly as they rode. "Going back to the cabin in the trees, going back to the creek beneath the hill. There's a girl used to live there when I left, but I doubt she'll be waiting for me still. Never thought I'd be gone so many years. When I left always planned that I'd return. But time slips away before we know. That's just one more lesson that we learn." They stopped singing after the second verse, but Crowley continued to whistle the refrain softly as they rode. Halt frowned at him. "You're making a strange shrieking noise," he said. Crowley looked round in surprise. He hadn't been aware that he was whistling, and he didn't immediately equate it with the phrase strange shrieking noise. "It's music," he said. "Not from where I'm sitting," Halt said. And with that, that will be the end of chapter number 11. Thank you all for listening, and I'll hope to see you next time in chapter 12. God bless, and have a good one.